When the rookies first come to MotoGP, they all rave about the horsepower, plus or minus 300 horsepower, the acceleration. But majority of them say that the braking is even more impressive. And so it should be, because brakes are actually more powerful than the engine. So I thought I'd come down to the Brembo truck and show you what MotoGP are using. So they're all using carbon brakes, both in the rain and in the dry. And the reason is, actually, we've got a steel rear disc from a MotoGP bike here. The reason they use carbon is steel actually stops really well, like no problem there. The problem is, once they reach 600-700 degrees, they lose their braking force friction, you know. So you're braking in the same place, but you're not stopping in the same place. And it's very important for racers to have consistency so they can do the same thing every lap, which makes it safer, faster. The other thing is with steel, apart from losing that braking force at 600-700 degrees, is the steel expands. So you can feel the disc getting fatter, literally feel it through the lever, the lever's going out as you're braking. And the other thing it does at high temperatures is dishes, you know, like dishes on because of the expansion. And the problem with the dishing is, when you grab the lever at the end of the straight, when the disc is dished, is you pull the lever in and the poor pads have to straighten the disc before they even start braking. And when they're straightening that disc, the lever's moving more. And when riders, they don't want to adjust the lever right out with the fingertips to have more movement. They adjust it where you have power, which is about there, you know. The problem is then you've only got a little bit before it hits a knuckle. So you've straightened the disc. By the time it starts braking, it's on your knuckle. It feels like you have no brakes. And riders don't like that. They come in and swear at the mechanic, the brakes are no good. So steel, the problem is good braking force, but reaches a temperature, has a limit, lack of brakes, inconsistent lever. So let's start talking about what they use instead, the carbon brakes. The first advantage I'd like to talk about is the steel disc here is actually heavier than this low mass disc. We're going to talk about a high mass disc in a moment. So the first thing I noticed when out on track with the carbon discs was at Mugello, fast chicane. You don't notice so much in the slow corners, but the fast turns, when the wheel's really spinning, gyroscopic effect, you can get the bike to go from one side to the other quicker, you know, which means a little bit faster and less energy. And the very first thing I noticed with the carbon is we've got to speak about temperature, because I rode out of the pit lane and down the first straight, grabbed the brakes, and nothing. The lever felt like it was welded to the handlebar. Nothing, no brakes. Then when they reached to around 250 degrees, the friction they work. And then by then you're pulling, like going, oh, and you're over brake. The bike's on its nose, you're like, oh, and straight in the gravel. And you only do it once. So this is the reason you see all of the MotoGP guys riding down the pit lane on the speed limit, but dragging the brakes, through the pit lane to get the temperature up around 250. So when they get to the first corner, the brakes work. Then, so 250, they work. The other thing is, they haven't got the expansion, and so the lever's more consistent, you know, like the steel. Then I said maximum of 600-700 degrees on the steel. These guys work no problem at that temperature, and even can go up to 1,000 degrees, you know, like for a short time, not too many times a lap, otherwise they call it oxidizing, but to you and me it's basically burning, so you get really rapid wear. And in that case, a couple of times a year, it's law, you know, in MotoGP rules that they use a high mass disc at places, especially like in Japan at Motegi, where the braking's crazy. See, basically it's the same surface area where the pad pushes on, but it's fatter here, so more weight in the disc. And the thing is, it conducts heat very well, so that heat caused here runs away quickly, and the temperature stays lower with the high mass disc, so safer. There's another couple of things we should talk about consistency with the brake lever, which is very important. we're talking about 600-700 up to 1,000 degrees. The problem is that heat transfers through to the brake fluid, and from the brake fluid, you're using the brake pump here. You pull on this, it forces fluid down the brake lines here. We've got an example of brake lines off a Moto2 bike actually, but these lines look like nice plastic. They've got a nice plastic anti-scratch sort of coating on, but inside they're steel wire, and because they're so strong they don't expand, and any expansion here is lever movement again, you know. So you pull on here and it expands here instead of pushing the disc. Also, the response is better without any expansion. Pull on here, immediately you feel the brakes. So the next thing in line, you have two of them, these beautiful calipers. So these are the latest model, MotoGP, and as you can see, they've got cooling fins on like an engine, you know, like a cylinder head. And the other thing we can point out here is this system here is a anti-drag, and it holds these pads in place. So normally on a normal caliper these pads would fall out. They're held. The reason for that is when you pull on the lever, those pads push on the disc. These anti-drag things pull the pads slightly off the disc again. What that does is lets the acceleration be better, you know, without the drag, but also the temperature. If there's any drag there causing more temperature, you know what that does, more problems, you know. Again, we spoke about temperature, and this is where the problem is. Directly on here, it goes through, like I said, up to 1,000 degrees there, you can see. It goes through into the fluid here, and the new model has less total fluid in the caliper, which means less chance of problem, you know. The other thing is the fluid in here needs to be changed regularly in the whole system, especially when they go to races in high humidity countries, for example Malaysia, you know, because humidity is absorbed into the fluid once it's exposed, you know, to the air. They put brand new fluid on Thursday, setup day, Wednesday, and constantly bleed. But if you can imagine fluid that can handle up to 200 degrees in this caliper, normal working is 130 to 150, but can handle up to 200. But humidity is water. Water boils at 100. It boils, it turns to steam, you know, gas. That is lever movement because it can compress. So they've got to keep on top of that all the time and keep the fluid nice and fresh. I hope you've enjoyed getting a little insight into MotoGP brakes. See you next time for the next Tech Talk.